Hello and welcome to another Drive With Me conversation. Today I wanted to talk about relationships. So, for some clarification, I work full time as a therapist, have been for some time now, and I have seen a number of couples over the course of my time in this field. I also grew up, watching my parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and so on, and then have had a number of conversations with my wife about the experiences she had growing up, where there was a lot of divorce and infidelity and things like that. And so I've actually wanted to talk about both sides of what relationships can look like and when it's worth sticking it out and when it isn't. Just kind of my thoughts on it. So, in general, I'm inclined to believe that we here in modern America in 2026 have largely kind of forgotten the purpose of marriage. That ultimately, despite our industrialization and our constant connectivity via modern technology, we humans have spent tens of thousands of years in relatively small tribes, clans, kinship groups. And our primary purpose has been survival and having children. And biologically, our purpose is to functionally replicate and continue the species. And that is the biological imperative of any living thing, is to replicate itself, to continue living. And if you don't, you proverbially lose the game of evolution and game of life, and something else can take that life form's place. And that's where we get the metric that we hear, or the percentage that we hear from many scientists, that something like 99.9% of all species that have existed are currently extinct. And regarding humans, we are an interesting bunch because as a lineage that seems to descend from great apes, we are a great ape as far as anatomically and taxonomically, things are concerned. We have an interesting kind of paradox wherein we have a tendency to pair bond, but we also have a strong tendency to be promiscuous as a species and not be unfaithful to our partners, if you will. That's how we word it, right? To basically have multiple sexual partners, even while generally being committed to one. You kind of see this in other great ape species, chimpanzees and bonobos. You also see kind of variations on violence or how sex is used to keep the family together or what have you in those same species. And humans, we have an interesting way of kind of going about it. One of the ways we've kind of solved the instability that happens with rampant infidelity and not knowing who the father of a given child is and so on throughout most of human history has been functionally what we today call marriage, right? It's existed for thousands of years, and it's become more and more institutionalized, especially here in the West, over time. And by the time we're getting to the classical Greco-Roman era, marriage is pretty firmly established, and it is mostly common that you have one man and one woman, and the primary purpose of a marriage was procreation, having children, but also securing alliances and maintaining stability of a family and ensuring that family and children can survive into the next generation. By the time we're getting into the medieval/Christian era, that takes on a religious connotation, and now marriage is considered a sacrament. It's something that's incredibly important and something that God wants, but that all serves the same purpose. It's stability. It's continuing the species. It's continuing to grow the population. It's being fruitful and multiplying, right? And the best way to do that is to pair every female that can produce children off with a male that can not only impregnate this female, for lack of a more eloquent explanation, and protect them and provide for them to make sure that they have children. This is the most efficient way to spread out society, to motivate men to stay less violent and more productive and more positive members of society, and to encourage women to do the same and stabilize and more or less settle down, if you will, and to make sure that the species continues. And in kind of the modern United States, we're hearing about, population slowdowns and people having fewer children, and much of our society, I think, has lost the plot, I suppose, lost the focus on what really matters with this stuff. And it's not that everybody should be having children. By no means. It doesn't mean that marriage is for everybody. However, ultimately what all of this comes down to is not personal fulfillment. It's not having your own Disney romance story. It is stability and having children and procreating so that the next generation can continue on the legacy of our species and our families and our names and so on, right? That ultimately is the purpose of all of this. And so we often kind of get in the weeds about whether or not we feel in love, whether or not we feel a connection, whether or not we feel appreciated or respected. And that has its place. But I have seen many relationships that call it quits and really don't consider the wider consequences to their children, to their financial stability, and to their own mental health long term, knowing that they're still going to have to deal with their ex, especially if there are children involved or there are finances that they're untangling. And sometimes it's worth it, in cases of abuse or just intense disruption in the family or instability and so on. There are moments where it's a good thing to, in the long run, to end a relationship and end a marriage. However, I would say it is much rarer a condition than would be represented with our relatively high divorce rates. And for the record, in case it's not obvious already, I am not coming at this from a religious perspective. Definitely not trying to say God hates divorce and therefore you shouldn't. That's not where I'm coming from at all. It is a matter of practical value. One of the fastest ways to destroy your ability to create wealth for yourself long term is to split up your family. One of the fastest ways to destabilize a child's development is to get a divorce and split up the family. And I also work with children that have dealt with this. I also work with people that have had multiple divorces and now are struggling in retirement, literally living in trailers in their 60s because they've never been able to stabilize financially and stay there. Even when they do, it's temporary because then they're splitting assets again. And every time they come out of the relationship not much better or sometimes worse than they were before. And I've seen this with men and women. So it's something to consider that just because we're moderately unhappy or we don't feel completely fulfilled does not mean that we should be ending marriages. And we should be taking a second look and really thinking it over before making those decisions, because this isn't a TV show. This isn't about whether or not you feel like this is a good place to be in. Also, why we should take our time and be very careful about it. Don't jump into marriage. Don't jump into long-term relationships. Don't commit until you feel confident that your goals and your foundational values and what you both want out of life and what you're both willing to sacrifice or change. For example, do you even want children? Are you willing to move if a job opportunity comes up? Who's going to be taking out the trash, etc.? These are things, even just household chores, they're important to discuss before you even get married, before you even get engaged, really. Like, it doesn't even have to be particularly serious, like what are you committing to or anything like that. Just generally, what do you think this looks like, or what does this look like in your house? What would you expect if you were, when you get married, if we were to get married, what do you think this would look like? What would you expect out of this? Do we sleep right next to each other in a small bed? Do you really feel strongly about having your own space where you store your own things? Do you are you one that really likes being together with somebody regularly? Do you like having kind of alone time for much of your evenings after work? or what have you, like just as examples. Like these are things that matter when you have somebody that is wanting more attention and more time and has a more like anxious attachment style versus someone that's more avoidant. That can cause some issues, and often they're drawn to each other in the dating stage, and then they push each other away during marriage, and that happens far too often. So trying to be aware of who you are and what your priorities and preferences are, and then try to match that with somebody that is complementary, and or work through some of your more notable issues. Maybe it doesn't even have to be in therapy, but be introspective, practice mindfulness, etc., and kind of try to be honest with yourself about what it is that's important to you, what it is that you're dealing with, and then try to match accordingly, instead of just going for what feels good or what feels like it clicks, what feels like it's a connection, because often that's our brain just feeling comfortable and feeling like it's familiar and feeling like it's something that is short-term arousing, but doesn't mean it's actually good for us. And I know a lot of us have heard about it. Like we've heard these kind of concepts before, but it's important to keep, I think, the broader picture in mind, that long term, 5 years into your marriage, 10 years into your marriage, if you get there, whether or not you like the same music or watch the same kind of TV shows or play video games together as often as you might like to, or watch anime together, or whatever the heck the things that feel important while you're dating may seem, they're not. They really don't. What matters far more is, are they loyal? Are they going to actually be a good parent to your children? Are they going to support you when you really need it? Are they going to be able to provide for the family if that's their role? Are they going to help you do so? Are they going to be willing to split household chores? Are they going to be willing to talk through things when it gets tough? When you're sick, are they going to be willing to be there to help you? Are you going to be willing to do the same? Are they going to be willing to put up with your family and all the nonsense that comes with that they're marrying into, and vice versa? Are you willing to do the same for them? These are all considerations we need to have before doing this, and it's far more important than surface level compatibility. I'm not trying to sound like, old man River here, that's just like complaining about or just harping about things that in an angry manner, because that's really not what I'm doing. I have seen a lot of couples, and often what they come in for are, they present as if it's pretty surface level, and then when you get to the core of it, you realize they didn't work through a lot of their foundational issues ever in the relationship. They just liked the individual, they felt a connection, and the momentum of the relationship carried them forward, and that's it. And by the time most people come to therapy, like relationship, like counseling, for couples, they're pretty far in a hole, and often one party or another has already kind of made a decision to emotionally distance from the relationship. And so often therapy works, but I would say just as often, if not slightly more often, it doesn't, because one party, like, you're coming to therapy as kind of a last ditch effort in many cases, especially as a couple. And I do believe that that's the wrong way to go about it, but that's also a bias on my part because I work in the field. But very often you already have a member that is checked out and another member of the relationship that feels like they want to fix it at all costs. And this is, well, we're going to throw a Hail Mary and work on this. And or it's like probation requires it or something like that in a domestic violence situation or what have you. I do have some of those where it's like, actually, there's really very little risk of them ending the relationship. It's just highly dysfunctional. Like, that happens too. So there are your basics as well. Like if you have one that is an alcoholic or is a drug user, or both or substance users, that very much increases the likelihood that the relationship does not survive long term, and that you're going to have issues raising children together, because it just is going to physically change your brain, change your mindset, change your expectations and desires in a way that is not going to leave you fit, and definitely not your partner fit, to be in a healthy relationship or function as an adult in most cases, or as a parent, at least not well, which is exactly why the number one reason why children are removed from their parents in like a child protective services kind of capacity is related to substance use, and then neglect, but almost always that neglect stems from substance use. It's extremely common. It is legitimately like 85-90% of children that are removed have something to do with alcoholism or drug use or relational dysfunction because of another party that has it. So even if like the primary caregiver, like I've seen this a number of times, where like the mom is the primary caregiver and she may not be using and she may be working, but the man that she is determined to stay with is like a meth head, right? For example, a chronic methamphetamine user. And she tries everything she can to stay in that relationship with him. And then they get into a big domestic violence incident, and then DCS or Child Protective Services, regardless of what it's called in a given state or area, is basically forced to intervene and remove the children, at least until things stabilize. And that I see that over and over and over again, because as a therapist in community health, I get a lot of referrals for families and for couples that are dealing with exactly that kind of stuff. In fact, I'd say roughly half of the couples I work with have had or do currently have issues with the Child Protective Services system. And so all of that to say, marriage is tough, relationships are tough. Having children is the easy part. Raising them and trying to keep a cohesive family unit together is far more difficult. And for an increasing number of us, that doesn't even seem to be as much the goal anymore. It's about personal happiness. And it doesn't mean that we buckle down and just knuckle through it at all costs. But I do think we Americans are losing and have lost a bit of grit and determination, and have kind of lost sight of what is actually important in life, and that is procreation and building your family and wealth and stability over time. None of those things come easily, and anything worthwhile in life is not easy. Whether it's finishing school, whether it's developing a career, whether it's having a relationship, whether it's getting in shape, or regardless, right? Doesn't really matter what long-term goal you have, staying healthy, eating better, whatever. It is about consistency. And even when you don't hit your mark, or you feel like you've had a bad day, getting up, dusting yourself off, and continuing forward, because that's how we build this. All of this takes effort and time and a lot of energy, and it can be exhausting. But as a husband and as a father, it's worth it, at least to me. And if you don't feel like it is, that's a pretty good sign that you should be very careful about entering into it, because these need to be things that you really want as a just a general rule. If you do not feel like it is something you strongly want, not ready, because you will never feel ready. If you wait until you feel ready to have children, you're probably never going to have them. That's the reality of it. Is none of us are really truly ready. You learn as you go. None of us are truly ready to have a good marriage or walk into a relationship truly knowing our partner. It just takes time. It takes effort. It takes showing up and being consistent as much as possible. And so I hope this gave some insight. I hope it gives encouragement, honestly. I know a lot of it's more negative about like all the things not to do, but I hope it also kind of gives a little bit of a clear roadmap as to what to do, and that it actually breaks down to some pretty easy concepts. Like continuing, if you just are present and show up and provide for your family and stay loyal to your partner and so on, like these are kind of general rules that really work. And so you can't always control, like it takes two to tango, right? So you can't control whether or not your partner stays loyal or whether or not they stay with you. And we should very much have our own boundaries. It doesn't mean bend over backwards for your partner if they're not willing to meet you halfway and meet you in the middle. However, we can do a lot towards making it more likely that our relationships succeed and that our children grow up in a stable family and environment as possible. So if you made it this far, thank you for watching. I do appreciate it. That was pretty much what I had to wanted to discuss today. So if you liked the video, please feel free to do so, like it. And otherwise, if you want to hear more about personal growth and development, technology, current events, economics, politics, etc., please stick around because we'll be talking about it. All right, y'all. Later.